Welcome back to The Cinnamon Effect. Today I have Cree Anaiyah Cox with me. She is a holistic cycle coach, Arvigo practitioner, massage therapist, and Celtic shamanic practitioner. She is passionate about guiding women on a transformative journey of self-discovery, connection with their bodies, and helping women to create a harmonious relationship with their cycles. Hi, Cree.
Hi, Kimberly.
How are you?
I'm doing quite well. How about yourself?
Good. So Cree is located in Park City, Utah. And I met Cree, I don't know, 4 years ago, maybe 4 or 5, well, maybe about 4 years ago. And when I first met you, you were talking about menstruation, the cycle, how to honor your cycle, like certain things you should do on a certain day of your cycle, certain things you should avoid. I mean, just how we enter getting our periods, all of this like really juicy information that was never, ever told to me in that way. And I had like a little bit of a breakthrough when I heard you speak about this. I was like, this kind of explains a lot about how I view, like how I originally got my period. It was kind of like a traumatic event for me. Like, and I won't go into that, but you know, like it was traumatic at the time. My dad had to pick me up from school. I didn't want to like talk to him about it. It was like this whole thing. And just when you were talking about this, I was like, oh my gosh, you know, that has probably shaped the way I viewed my period going forward, especially as a teen. You know, it was always kind of this traumatic space I was in every month, and I would dread it. And you brought to light really making women feel empowered when they have their periods. And I had never, ever heard anybody speak of it this way. So you blew my mind back then. And I'm so excited that you're with me today, that we get to talk about this. And I know a lot of women have probably never been exposed to what you do. So if you can just take me through maybe how you got started in this work and what you actually help women do.
Okay. Yeah. And I just want to say what you shared with your experience, that's way more common across the board than anything else. Mm-hmm. This summer, I did a rite of passage ritual for a young woman who got her first moon. And I've been talking with her mom for years about it leading up to it. And it ended up her getting her first moon ended up when we were having a women's gathering over summer solstice with 50 women. And I was like, can we do a ritual for her? Can we welcome her into womanhood? So there were 50 women there. And I asked all of the women who had any sort of proper welcoming into womanhood and when they got their first blood, and none of them raised their hands. So that's the common story. There's so much shame and embarrassment and hiding and all sorts of things piled upon the first menstrual experience. And it's not just the first menstrual experience, but then it's the society that we live in where it's changing now, but still it's more common that it's a taboo to even talk about it. And you definitely don't talk about it to men. Young girls don't want to talk to their dads about it. No. It's embarrassing. You don't know what's going on. Most women didn't have anyone telling them anything leading up to it either. So I just wanted to speak to that. A big piece of the work that I do, so I do one-on-one work with women, and I also do group programs, which I actually haven't done for about 2 or 3 years, but I'm starting to do that again. Sometime in the next couple of months, I'll be getting that going up and going because it's so important to have that connection with other women. I also do Arvigo therapy, which you experience, which is my abdominal massage, and it's helping to correct the position of the uterus in the pelvic bowl, which then helps improve all sorts of hormonal issues, menstrual cycle issues, women who are having difficulties conceiving. It just really helps to get the uterus into proper alignment so that things can function more optimally. And then I'm currently in my second year of schooling right now to become a certified fertility awareness educator. So it's just kind of infused into everything that I do. And this is never anything I thought I was going to do when I was young. I had the same experience as everyone else. Like, period was just a thing that happened and you don't really talk about it, and you hope you don't like get blood on your pants or things like that.
Yes, yes.
But it just, when I was around the age of 19, it started shifting when I got into healthy and organic eating, and I started my period, and I was at the health food store, and I had just learned about like using organic cotton tampons versus the conventional ones.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to look for some. And at that point, I still I wasn't tracking my cycle. So I didn't know when it was going to start. It just came by surprise.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to go get tampons, and they only had ones without an applicator. And I was like, well, I want to use organic. I'm on my period. Like, I guess I'm going to try this out. Like, so much is new right now.
Yeah.
And the first time that I used it and inserted it and had a physical connection with my body and my blood, something switched in me. And there was just this internal thought that I was like, I think there might be something more to this whole period thing than is being talked about anywhere. And then through synchronicities, I ended up meeting some different mentors, one here in Salt Lake City, and then it's just been an evolutionary path, and it very much feels like it's like a soul path, and it's a part of my purpose and my mission to bring about this whole new lens and perspective to share, not with just women, but with everybody.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. And I think if we can change how women look at it when they are first starting out with their period. I mean, I'm looking back now in my 40s thinking, oh my gosh, I wasted all of this time worrying about the period, dreading the period, and probably amplifying, the symptoms I was experiencing in turn, because I was dreading it so much. Like, is that part of what you do? Like, it's got to be like a mindset shift for people, right? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. The mindset piece is huge. And I have some women that I've worked with in my courses in the past that have been diagnosed with PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And basically, it's like extreme PMS. Doctors say they don't really know what causes it. Sometimes it's hormonal imbalances and things like that, which it's always important to address hormonal things when there's extreme PMS and things like that. But I've had some women that just by having that mindset shift and starting to adapt their life to work in sync with their flow versus just trying to do the same thing day in, day out, having complete disregard of the menstrual cycle, overriding it when it's coming, not tuning into the internal cues and shifts that are coming of where our energy levels are at based on hormones. Just by them starting to change their perspective and their mindset, their symptoms significantly decrease, because it's like our uterus and our hormonal system, our bodies in general, are so intelligent. And I view it as our internal guidance system. So if we're overriding it all the time, and if we're not listening all the time, when something's not listening, or being listened to, I should say, it's going to get louder, and it's going to keep trying to get your attention over and over and over and over again until you finally listen and start to pay attention to what's going on.
That makes so much sense. That really does make so much sense to me. So how do you shift the mindset with your clients? Like, is it through affirmations? Is it through meditations? What kind of things, if you can give me an idea of how you are helping people shift the mindset?
A big piece starts with education, actually. Mm-hmm. I'm not teaching women anything that is new per se. It's I'm more so just giving them a roadmap to the hormonal rhythms that are playing out on a monthly basis, and teaching them about the archetypical cycles that we go through. Mm-hmm. So the education is huge, because once we know something, then we can work with it. Once you have permission to do less during your period, and someone tells you, hey, if it doesn't absolutely need to be done, don't do it. You need to shift gears during this time. Your hormones are at their lowest. Your energy levels are at the lowest. Start to tune into your body and pay attention to what your body actually feels like it's capable of. That alone starts to create the shift, because you now have this roadmap to understand what is going on in the body.
So what are the kind of take me through the cycle if you can, and tell me, like, obviously it makes sense that during your period, your energy would be at its lowest, but there are times during the cycle when the energy is at its highest. And I remember you saying, like, this is the time where you want to be like around other people. Maybe you feel more social. Like, tell me about, take me through the cycle and tell me about these times, and like maybe what we should avoid doing or what we should do during those specific times. Because it's so fascinating to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is the piece that I love, and I'll try and keep it concise because there's actually a lot of layers to it, and I can just like go on and on about it. So I'll try and keep it as like to the point as possible.
Okay.
So starting with day one of the cycle, day one is when you first start bleeding. If you have any days of spotting leading up to your full flow releasing, those aren't counted as day one. Those can actually be an indicator of some hormonal imbalances that are going on. And so once you like start your full flow, that's day one. And that starts the menstrual phase. And each phase is also tied into an inner season. So it starts the phase of the inner winter. Okay. So I'm here in Utah where we full on have winter. And so it's like, I like to really draw awareness of how intimately connected the female body is with the earth. And so as we're going through our inner seasons, it's reflecting the outer seasons that the earth goes through. Okay. So during wintertime is much more of a like, hunker down, have really nourishing food, drink warm teas, read books. It's dark really early. And so it's not like you're out and about and doing a bunch of things kind of energy. So with the menstrual phase, when that starts, all of the hormones are at their lowest point. And also, women can feel like a little bit of energy returning during that time. It's very common for women to have the 1 to 3 days prior to when they start bleeding. That can sometimes actually feel like the most intense point of the cycle. Mm-hmm. But once day one starts, there can be a return of energy, but it's not a like, let me put myself out into the world and exert myself kind of energy. It's to be directed internally to heal the body and to heal the nervous system. So it really gets to be a time of rest and moving slower. And
so I want to ask just really quick, if we are, so you are in winter and, but if we are in sunny South Florida, like I am, but you should treat it as like an internal winter is what you're saying. So eat the warming foods and do all of that, even if your environment is not really winter-esque. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because it's tending to the internal environment. Okay. And the internal environment is that you're in this internal winter and that your body needs more of that nourishing food and rest. And, as I share these things, like this is the archetypal cycle, and I'm giving some suggestions, but one of the things that I do in my work actually is I always invite women to tune into themselves and to tune into their bodies. I'm like, okay, here's this information, but what are you noticing for you? Mm-hmm. And that's a big piece of the work that I do is attuning women to their bodies and their own internal guidance system, instead of like women have a tendency to be like, oh, like I'm doing something wrong, or it's not good enough, or this or that. Like we can be really hard on ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so I don't want this to be another thing of like, oh, well, Cree said I'm supposed to feel this way at this point in my cycle and I'm not. Like, what's wrong with me? Right. The whole practice of menstrual cycle awareness that I teach is it's an opportunity to come into presence with the body and to really notice how we're feeling in each and every moment. And so I teach women how to discover this for themselves. So I just want to put that out there that like, this is just like a broad general cycle, but it might show up different. There's always going to be variances.
Yes, totally.
So generally the menstrual energy lasts anywhere from 3 to 7 days. And it's not like you're in menstruation and then all of a sudden, like you switch to the next. There's like a gradual transition over a day or two in between each of the different phases. So the next phase is the follicular phase. And this is when follicle stimulating hormones starts to be generated in the body. And then the follicle stimulating hormone is what starts to trigger estrogen a little bit later. And that's what starts this whole process of the body preparing to ovulate. So one thing I want to say about the menstrual cycle is that it's actually all about ovulation. If you aren't ovulating, then you're not having a menstrual cycle. You're not going to be bleeding. Mm-hmm. And our ovulation, it's not, we don't want to just be concerned about ovulation and fertility if we're trying to get pregnant. As a female body, ovulation is a sign of our overall health and vitality and fertility in general, whether we're trying to conceive or not. So it's actually really important to know if you're ovulating or not.
Okay.
So the follicular phase usually starts around approximately day 6 to 7. And I'm basing this on a 29-day cycle. There can be variances from 24 to 36 days, and that's a healthy cycle.
Okay.
Depending on how it shows up for the woman. So that's another myth that like a cycle is supposed to be 28 days. And if it's not 28 days, there's something wrong. Like there's always variances. We're not like cut and dry like that. So that starts around day 6 or 7, and it lasts for maybe 5 or 6 days, depending on how long the cycle is. And this is when follicle stimulating hormone is coming in and estrogen starts to come online more. And so there starts to be more of this rise of energy, because estrogen is what brings about drive and ambition and motivation and desire. And so with that, there's kind of like this, like for me, I really feel this like return to life. Mm-hmm. I'm naturally an introvert, so I go like really deep internal during my menstrual energy. But then spring comes and I'm like, oh, I want to start doing all the things. And like during menstruation for me, like all the daily tasks just feel harder because like my hormones are lower and I don't have the energy for it. But then I enter into spring and I'm like, where's my to-do list? And I'm like crossing a bunch of things off, and I'm like, oh, I can do the laundry and I can cook and I can see 2 clients today and then I can go dance, and like, I'm like, I have more energy. So it's really fun. Like, cause when we allow ourselves the rest that we need during the menstrual phase, then we can more readily ride this wave of energy as it's coming in. If we're continuing to override the need for rest cycle after cycle after cycle, you may not experience this as much because your body is depleted and you're not resting in the way that it needs at the time that it's signaling for rest. Mm-hmm. So you may not get as much of a high. Like I take 3 days off while I'm bleeding. And so for me, like my highs are really high. Sometimes I feel like cracked out. Just like, oh, okay, I'm glad I'm not like this all the time.
Yeah. So that's so interesting because I think, you know, a lot of us, like you said, we push through during the bleeding phase. And so we're kind of like denying ourselves of this peak phase of our cycle where we could really actually probably tackle the world, you know? And, so that's so interesting. What do you suggest for women that are, you know, just busy all the time, that feel like, I know people are going to say, well, guess what? I can't take 3 days off. Like I have young kids or whatnot. What are some things that you suggest doing, like just for them to slow down a little bit? I mean, I just think, I know that some people will say, well, I have multiple children, they're tiny. Like I can't just not, you know, do this or do that. What are your suggestions for that?
Yeah, I love that you're asking this because I actually get that all the time. Like right now I work for myself. I'm not a mother yet. And I'm really curious how all of this is going to transform for me when that does happen.
Yeah.
But I think that women still do more than they need to do. Mm-hmm. So with that, of course, when you have young kids, like you don't really get the luxury of time off like that. Mm-hmm. However, it's a little different for single moms, but if you're in partnership, this is where like another piece of what I do is like giving women language to be able to explain where they're at and the level of support that they need. Mm-hmm. So starting to incorporate language into the house, even with the kids, of like, it's mom's moon time. We don't do that right now. And I use the term moon time. I like that more than period. It just feels softer and more gentle and is like a reminder of our connection to the phases of the moon. Mm-hmm. I like that. You can use period, whatever it is. I've been using that for years. So it's a big piece of menstrual cycle awareness and taking it on as a lifestyle is creating boundaries, especially when you need them. And so part of that is like, as kids get older and become more aware, out of the toddler phase and everything, say you have young boys and they love to wrestle, but you're like, nope, we don't do that during mom's moon time. And you know what? We're going to, like, instead of going out and playing all the time, we're going to throw some of the rules out the window and we're going to watch a lot of movies or, like adapting the whole family unit lifestyle to be more in rhythm with what's needed at that time. And like for women, sometimes when their flow first comes on, it's just like their bodies get so heavy and so tired. So I like to challenge women of like, okay, do you really need to fold the laundry right now? Or can you let it stay and be messy for another day or two and let yourself have some tea and go lay on the couch and rest? Even if it's for 30 minutes, even if that's all you can get, it's just like training yourself into giving yourself permission to rest as much as possible when your body is asking for the rest instead of overriding. And I know it's much easier said than done, because sometimes when you're in your house and you're seeing all the things, you're just like, I just got to do this. It's just got to get done. Yeah. But that's where some of like the mindset and lifestyle changes come in, is we have to train ourselves out of that patterning and start to tune into our bodies and start to listen and start to communicate, like letting your body know, like our bodies are really intelligent, and being like, okay, I have this next 30 minutes to totally sink into this hot bath. The kids are taken care of. I'm not going to be disturbed. This is all the rest I can give you, but like I'm giving my full presence to this bath right now.
Yeah. I love that. Even if we could just do, one thing to just create a little bit more space and more rest for ourselves. And I love that because, I think my son is kind of aware of like a period. I mean, he's seen me, like, what's that? And, this and that. So not to give too much away, but actually explaining to him more about it, and I love the phrase moon time. I really like that. It does have like a softer connotation. So I can't wait to go and tell them, tell my husband, this is my moon time. And like, kind of reframe this all for him. I think they just don't know. Like I said, most people were raised where they weren't, they didn't speak about this in that way. So if we can start now, gosh, what a great husband he'll be one day, right? If he knows, all this.
Totally. And that's the thing, is I feel like men naturally want to support us, but oftentimes we don't know how to tell them what we need. And so this empowers us to start to learn more of what we need. And this is actually a way of leading with feminine energy. The menstrual cycle is the most feminine energy that I know. And it's feminine energy is not just one thing. Feminine energy is super dynamic. And so when we start to lead with feminine energy via leading through our menstrual cycles, then we can let husbands, partners, loved ones know, hey, I really need extra support right now. Like, can you please make sure that the dishes are done and the food is cooked so that I have less responsibilities so that I can actually give myself permission to rest? I need a little more space during this time. Can you take the kids out of the house for a couple hours so I can just be in my own space, sort of thing? So there's this process of discovery, of learning what you actually need during the different phases of your cycle. And this is one thing that I break down in the course that I do with journal prompts. And like, I have this whole cycle mapping thing outlined to really discover what that is, because it takes awareness and it takes tuning in and it takes the permission. Again, like we need permission over and over again to rest when we need it, and to realize we don't have to do all the things all the time, that there's a point in the cycle for that. And that we need to know how to shift gears and trust that the energy will continue to shift. It's a whole shift in perspective from like a more linear style living to a cyclical style living.
I love that. Okay. So ovulation, high peak energy, goals, all of that. And then where do we go from there?
Yeah. So I kind of left like the follicular and ovulation are very like hand in hand. They're technically two separate things, but we left off in the follicular. So that lasts about like 5 to 6 days. And then the ovulation window opens, and I call it the ovulation window because that can last anywhere from 2 to 5 days, depending on the woman, but you're not ovulating that whole time. Ovulation is a singular event where the egg is released from the follicle and it's alive for 12 to 24 hours. So the moment of ovulation is very specific and small, but the ovulation window is when estrogen really starts to ramp. It like starts to crest up. In the school that I'm going, we call it the fertile wave. And it's like when you're riding this wave and estrogen is building, testosterone comes in. As you get closer to ovulating, even oxytocin comes in. So we're literally given the opportunity to ride this hormonal high. And this is where we can feel like superwoman. This is where moms feel like, typically they're like the ideal mom because they think their kids are cute and funny all the time, and things that annoy them later in the cycle. They're like, oh, but they're just so sweet. And they're like, they can like do all of the cleaning and play with the kids. And it's just like, it's superwoman time.
Yeah. They're crushing it. They're crushing life and feeling really good.
Yeah. And it's hard because it is like this high. And so when we come out of it, it's like, oh, okay, that was a good ride. I guess I'll wait till the next cycle sort of thing. And I call that ovulation come down.
Okay.
Real quick, I guess the two things I didn't say is I just want to bring in the inner season. So with the follicular, that's the inner spring. And then the ovulation, that's the inner summer.
Okay.
And then once the egg is released from the follicle and it's no longer viable after that 24-hour period, estrogen drops rapidly, oxytocin goes, testosterone goes, all of the hormones drop. And if you look at it on a hormone chart, it's a very significant drop. So I actually call that moment ovulation come down.
Okay.
Because it literally is like coming down from a high, and you can feel like so motivated and so sexy and confident and like you're crushing it and like all these things. And then like, once those hormones go and you like really have that first drop, you can start feeling really insecure, like you're questioning everything in your life. Like everything can just feel really overwhelming. Like yesterday, your kids were so cute and adorable. And right now it sounds like nails on a chalkboard kind of energy. Yeah. It's a very dramatic shift. And it's good to be aware of it. And that's why cycle mapping is so important, because instead of wondering what's wrong with me, which is so common for women to do, especially in this shift, because it's so dramatic, you can soften and be like, oh, ovulation come down. My hormones have just plummeted and I have very little capacity for much of anything right now.
Yeah, I relate to that a lot because I do feel like I have those super high highs of like, yeah, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to go out and save the world. And, and then the next day I'm like, what was I thinking? It is a severe come down. Like, oh my God, that podcast that I was thinking about is just terrible. Like, well, just all the things. So what can we do? Like, is there anything we can do to support ourselves in that come down phase? Because that is something real.
I wish I could say I figured out a way to override it.
Yeah, I wish, right? I was hoping for this like magical secret that you have, Cree.
And that's one thing about this practice is we can't change hormones. Mm-hmm. The female body is governed by hormones, and we can't change that fact. Now, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. So what can be done in that come down energy, when you notice what's going on, there's this idea of holding the tension. And this is where mindset stuff comes in again, because instead of allowing those insecure thoughts of like, what was I thinking? That was so stupid. That's never going to work. It's just like you kind of hold the tension in that energy. And it's like training the dog of your mind of like, nope, you're going to sit, you're going to stay. That's not true. My hormones have dropped right now and I need to reconfigure my energy. And so it's like we're kind of like being mothers to ourselves in a way of like holding our own inner self with tenderness and compassion. And when the judging mind comes in and all of that stuff, we have to continually just be like, no, it's just, you know what? I'm not even going to think about any podcast I'm doing for a couple days until the energy shifts. Cause that's the thing with the ovulation come down. Is it's a moment. And I found for me, when I don't resist it, and when I literally, sometimes I'll try and pull out my computer because I was so inspired the day before, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do all this stuff. And it's just like complete block. I'm like, oh yeah, ovulation come down. I have to remind myself every cycle, shut down the computer. What would feel the most nourishing right now? And usually it's doing as little as possible. But what will happen is after that couple day drop, estrogen rises again. And once ovulation has occurred, progesterone starts to rise, and that becomes the more dominant hormone. Whereas in the follicular and ovulation phase, estrogen was the more dominant hormone. So they switch, and estrogen doesn't completely go off. It has a secondary rise, but it stays lower than progesterone. Okay. So in a sense, this puts us into the luteal phase, which is the longest phase of the cycle. And I call it truth time, because during the spring and summer energy, we kind of have filters on, like we can put up with people's BS a lot easier, and like things just roll off, all of this kind of stuff. But also we're not as connected into our internal self. So the luteal phase marks that descent back into the inner self. And it's a process of reassessing what is and isn't working in our lives, refining. So we're like making tweaks and changes as to what isn't working so we can come into more of a state of an alignment. So it's really a beautiful time, but it's also one of the most challenging times of the cycle if you don't know what is happening and if you're expecting your luteal self to be your ovulation self. It's never going to happen. Interesting. And that's what we do a lot of the times. We put these expectations to we keep trying to grab for that same level of motivation, but the hormones aren't there. It's the hormones that are giving us that high and that motivation and the desire and all of the things. And so we need to adapt to where the hormones are. And it shifts a little bit, but we can also during this time see things more clearly and a little more practically. And, we get to attune to like our body's increasing need for rest, our body's increasing need for space. And also this is where I call it truth time, because when there's issues within our lives, say we're working a job that we really hate, and every single luteal phase, we're like, ugh, I hate this job, yada, yada, yada. But then the cycle goes and you get into spring and summer and the filters come on and you're like, oh, I can override this. It's not that bad. Let me just look at it through these rose-colored glasses. But the stuff that's coming up in luteal, that's the ultimate truth, because we're more connected to our internal self. And that's what we get to listen to. It's to align us with our soul's path. And if we're not listening, it can be really intense.
Wow, that's so interesting, because I'm feeling like I have felt everything that you're saying. And I do feel like, oh, I will have that come down. I will think that every idea I had a couple days prior is terrible. But then I will come back around and I'll say, no, that was a really good idea. And it is like kind of just, you're on this like little bit of a roller coaster, and you just go through it all. But this is putting such a great explanation to like what I've been feeling. And I'm sure so many of us are feeling. So I thank you for that, because it's so helpful. And I think if we can all just acknowledge it, right? Do that a little bit of soul searching and journaling and saying, okay, this is what I feel at this time of the month, and really track it like you're saying. Do you recommend any particular, like I do have an app where I track my cycle, but is there something that you recommend in particular for tracking?
I personally don't necessarily recommend apps.
Okay.
Not that there's anything wrong with them. For some women, they're great. Like some women are into apps and they're awesome and great to use. I've just been charting my cycle with the fertility awareness method for 9 years. And so it's much more in depth than what I'm talking about here, because it's like monitoring the signs of my body to use as a form of contraceptive.
Okay.
Which is just a whole nother level of body awareness. But so
is that like taking you're like taking your temperature and things like that? Can you talk a little bit about that? I know it's kind of in depth, but
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me just speak to the app question first, and then I can talk about that. So I personally like to just plug where I'm at in my cycle into my Google Calendar, because then when I'm making plans, I can look ahead. Like with you proposed last Wednesday, and I was like, that's likely going to be day one of my bleed, like not a good time.
Yeah. And how great. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know
and
that,
it was.
Yeah.
And I just I was so tired that day. I just dropped in, and it would have been a very, very different podcast that day. And that's I plan my entire life around my cycle. And so that's why I like to have it in my Google Calendar, because I can be like, oh, I'm going to be in luteal. I know I'm in ovulation right now, and I want to say yes to all the things, and I want to hang out with all the people and go to all of the gatherings. But in a week, I need to be thinking about my luteal self. So I'm going to say no to that thing, actually, because I know when I'm in luteal, I'm not going to want to do that.
You are blowing my mind right now, because I think if everyone could just do that, we would know, you know what, that's not going to be a good fit for me. And, you would avoid canceling at the last minute, or because you feel this way or feel that way. But looking ahead, that is so empowering. And now I really understand this empowerment that you're talking about when you acknowledge the cycle. It's just it's all coming together again.
Yeah. We have to take our whole woman self into account. And we have all of those seasons. We have all of those phases that we go through. So many of us are in this habitual, oh, well, let me look at my calendar Monday through Friday. Okay. Let me just plug this in. And then we are in certain phases of our cycle when something comes around and it's oh, this is a bad idea. Yeah. And we don't necessarily realize it. So it helps to negate that. So one of the things I teach in my Embody Your Flow Foundations course that I'm going to be launching soon is looking at things from a cyclical perspective. So no longer just looking at the weeks of the calendar, but looking at it with the overlay of what phase of your cycle you're going to be in, so that you can plan to better support yourself. It really is a total game changer.
Yes.
So with apps, one thing I don't love about them is it still causes women to kind of have their awareness outside of them of oh, well, my app says I'm in this. So it still can create a little bit of a disconnect. And that's not always the case. They're great tools. But I had one woman once, she was oh, my app says I'm supposed to start my period today, but I haven't yet. I wonder what's wrong. And I'm well, there's more to it than your app predicting it based off calculations of past information.
Yes.
But it is super helpful to be able to have to track data and all of that kind of stuff if people don't want to do it by hand. So I'm not talking down on apps by any means. It's really a matter of finding what works for you. But I found that at least incorporating it into whatever calendar you use regularly is a total game changer, because you're already on it. All of the things you're planning are there. You can just look and see where you're going to be, rather than going back and forth of hold on, let me check my cycle calendar. Okay, now let me cross over here. And it just takes out a lot of the back and forth.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because I have an app. I don't think it's a great app or not a great app, but I have been using it for a while. And I do the same exact thing. Oh, period's supposed to start today, but it didn't. But is something wrong, or, whatnot? And yeah, because I'm just relying on what this app is telling me and not really thinking oh, well, I feel like it's starting today, or I feel yeah. So that makes total sense. I like this. Yeah.
And that's why I like to teach with the foundation of what I do. I have women give it at least a few months of the whole process that I have. And then if they want to start using an app, once they have more of an integrated body awareness, and more so use it as just a way to keep data, that's more so how I'll suggest it, because they are very handy. So then as far as the fertility awareness method, there's of course a lot that could be said about it, but I'll just give a basic overview of charting your cycle as a form of contraception, or to enhance your chances of conceiving, because you are able to identify in time when your most fertile time is, instead of guessing. The standard information that's out there a lot of the times of like women ovulate around day 14, so just have sex every other day until then, is it's so bad. It's not only the bad advice, it's really unnecessary, because a good chunk of those days you can't even physically get pregnant. So again, it's another piece of empowerment. Like, a big part of my mission is connecting women to their bodies and teaching them the things that we've never learned, that is basic information that we should know.
Yeah.
And I love it, because it's just like, oh my God, I've been noticing this stuff, but I've never had anyone tell me about it. And now I know what's going on. Like, our bodies are so intelligent, and to be able to listen to them is huge. So for me, I've been tracking my cycle. I was initially self-taught with Tony Weschler's Taking Charge of Your Fertility. Okay. And now that I'm in school to be a fertility awareness educator, I don't necessarily recommend the self-taught path. There's nothing wrong with it. Like, it worked out fine for me, but there's so much more in working with a practitioner that I'm just like, okay, I had that foundation, but like, there's so much more to this. So essentially, it's the practice of taking your temperature first thing in the morning to get your basal body temperature, and then monitoring cervical fluid throughout your cycle. So what happens with the temperature is, in your pre-ovulatory phase, from day 1 of your bleed until you ovulate, your temperature is at a lower range. And then once you ovulate and progesterone starts to be released, your temperature actually goes up higher. And I'm showing it this way because when you have it mapped out on a chart, it's a biphasic temperature. Okay. So you can see a specific difference where the temperature ratings are coming in. So your temperature lets you know that ovulation has occurred. So that's all temperature is doing. It's not telling you when ovulation is occurring. It lets you know that it already has occurred. Okay. By its progesterone is now starting to be produced in your body. And so your temperature rises. Progesterone is progestation. So in case you've gotten pregnant during that cycle, it increases the body temperature to help the survival of the implantation and all of that kind of stuff. Okay. The thing that lets us know the most about our fertility in present moment as to what's going on is monitoring cervical fluid. And there's specific cervical fluid patterns that come out once estrogen starts to kick in, because estrogen is responsible for the production of cervical fluid. Once these patterns start to come about, it's telling us about our hormonal health. It's telling us about our vaginal health. It's telling us about our fertility. It's giving us so much information just in the cervical fluid patterns alone. And then that way you can identify it. So for me, like, I know when I'm ovulating, I know my patterns. I've been mapping it for so long, and I know how long my luteal phase is. So that's how I'm able to really pinpoint when I'm going to start bleeding. So it's not like guessing. Kind of with the foundational stuff I teach, there's a little bit of like, observation and calculation stuff going on, where fertility awareness and the method that I'm learning is all just observation based.
Wow. So interesting. When I was in Utah, I remember, people going to see you, and like, you kind of got a little bit of a reputation as like, you want to get pregnant, you go see Cree. I mean, you really are amazing at what you do and how in tune you are. And I just think this work is so incredible. I was going to ask, so if you are not, so I have a couple questions, but if you are not bleeding any longer, so you have entered like menopause, how do you adjust what you teach to that phase of life? Can you speak on that?
Yeah, so I actually don't work a lot with women who are entering into menopause. Okay. I'm such an embodied person that this is the phase of life I'm in right now. And so that makes sense. Where my focus is. However, I do want to share one piece. There's a Native American proverb that says, when a woman gets her first blood, it's also known as menarche. Sometimes it's pronounced menarche. That's her introduction to her power. And every time she has her period, after that, that's her getting familiar with her power. So like that right there just speaks to the potency and power that we have as women during that time. And then when she crosses the threshold into menopause, all of her power is contained within her. And I like to share that because it really helps to reframe, again, just like we have such a negative connotation with menstruation, we have a negative connotation with menopause. We're not listening to the deeper messages of the body or the deeper messages of the soul, or attuning our lives to how they need to be as cyclical women, because we don't live in a society that supports it nor taught us that. So getting to reframe that and realizing that there's this, like, it's almost like you're more, once you cross into menopause, you're more in like a luteal / menstrual energy. Okay. In the sense of like, there's a lot of people that believe that like women are, instead of going through these like cycles of being more connected to their psychic powers and intuition, they're just holding that all the time, because instead of the energy going down and out, it's now contained within them. So there's this internal energy cultivation. So part of how that shows up in the menopausal phase is like true time, not caring as much what people think after spending a lifetime of like worrying about what people are going to think, all these things. As women like cross into menopause, they're like, who cares? Yeah. Like, I'm just going to be me. And that's part of like the maturation of self and the maturation of women. And I have heard that a lot of menopausal women still feel like they have some kind of cycle that plays out. So that's again where some of the basic cycle mapping stuff comes in, is through journaling and doing different practices. You pay attention and you map out if there's any sort of rhythm to your fluctuations of moods and emotions.
Interesting. Yeah. So don't keep, tuning into that, don't let that go just because there's no actual period happening. So your intuition, love to talk about intuition, that is at its peak during menstruation.
Yeah.
For women,
and also
typically.
Okay, because it's like we're getting more connected to our internal self and we're seeing things more clearly. It can be overlaid with the inner critic more during the luteal phase. Okay. But if you think about it, like during menstruation, the cervix, it has a little opening called the os, and the os opens to release the blood. The womb is the holder of life. That's where life gestates. We all were once in a womb. And women's bodies are like these channels to birth life through our physical body. So it's bringing spirit into form. So during menstruation, when our wombs are releasing and becoming more open and releasing the energy and no longer holding, it's like there's this clear channel energy that can come through and we can receive direct downloads. Like I've had some times where I'm just like laying there, just like resting, and I always keep a notebook close by because all of a sudden I'll just like boom, and I like have this whole blog post come out. Or sometimes I like pull out my computer and where I was feeling stuck on like creating the sales copy for my page, I like bust it all out, and I'm like, whoa, okay, that was just like 5 hours on the computer. Like what just happened?
Yes, those downloads. I like live for those downloads. Like, I just feel like that's the best time ever. Okay. The answers just like came to me. I love that. When you were talking about in the very beginning about honoring that young girl's first moon, as you called it, what are some things that you do in a ceremony like that? I'm so curious.
So I've done 3 of them now. And one thing that I've learned, I have women all the time be like, this is the stuff I wish I knew when I was a teenager. Yes. And then you actually hang out with teenagers and you're like, no, it's not. This is what yourself now thinks you wish you knew, but teenagers like, I have a niece who's 16 now, and she was actually the first one that I did a ritual for. And I had all of these ideas in mind. And then when it came down to it, I could we would talk about things for like a tiny bit and then we'd go into something else. So really, when it comes to doing rituals for our young women, a big piece is following their lead. Like asking that they want it. That was
Okay.
one thing with my girlfriend, with the gathering with 50 women that we did. We asked her daughter for permission. We weren't just like, hey, we're doing this thing for you. We asked if that was something that she wanted. We got her consent and her yes.
Okay.
So like throwing a period party isn't probably going to go over well with most women. But it's like really following their lead. So I learned from this man, Michael Mead, who I was talking to about ritual stuff. I love ritual. I feel like it's a lost practice that we get to remember. I incorporate ritual and ceremony into so many aspects of my life. But there's this idea of creating a threshold. So you create a line. It can be a rope. It can be sticks. It can be drawn in the sand or whatever it is. And on one side of that threshold, that represents like where that person once was. So when we did this ritual, this young woman was on that side of the threshold. And the only woman that was over there was a woman that was smudging her and preparing her for the ritual and to cross the threshold. The rest of us, we were all on the other side of the threshold. So that side was representative of her childhood because the first blood is entering into the seasons of womanhood. You enter into the maiden. Yeah. So she's crossing that threshold where she's no longer a child anymore and she's entering into the seasons of woman. So we had the whole community of women on the other side. We had the threshold set up and her mom standing just on the other side of the threshold, and the community of women were back behind her. And I told her, I was like, okay, I explained what it was representing. I was like, you know, when you get to the threshold, you can feel free to pause and think about anything you want to let go of. Yeah, it doesn't really translate to 13-year-olds.
Yeah.
She didn't have a pause moment.
Yeah.
But I was like, at least like look down at the threshold, because looking down at the threshold, that's signaling to the psyche when you step over it that you are exiting the phase of child and you are entering the seasons of woman.
Wow.
So she got smudged. She did her thing. Everyone came to the other side. I started playing my drum to let her know it was time to start. And she made that journey, and she didn't stop at the threshold. She just, you know, she didn't have any moments of reflection at 13, but she at least did look down at the threshold, and her mom gave her a big hug. And as soon as she crossed the threshold, the whole community just started cheering.
Yeah.
And I had a couple of gifts that I gave her and said a few words, and that was it. And then what's really beautiful is we do monthly new moon circles here in Salt Lake. This is the start of the 8th year that I've been doing them. Wow. And she comes to all of our circles now. Her mom was like, yeah, she just feels like she's part of the circle now.
Yeah.
It's just so fun because she's like, yeah, I'm a woman now. Like, yeah, I'm still the maiden, and yeah, I still have kid energy sometimes because I'm 13 and I'm a maiden. But it's just so beautiful to be able to create that.
I really love that because I have a lot of friends who have that age of daughters right now. And I think what a powerful, beautiful thing to acknowledge that in such a way with a ritual, and to, you know, to just kind of to reframe. That's the whole point of this conversation, is to expose people to this reframing of the menstrual cycle. And it's information that I wish I would have had, you know, many years ago, but I'm lucky to have met you and to have gotten that information at some point too. And I will say, and I know this is probably TMI, but since I was exposed to your message and we did some work together, I would say my periods have gotten better. You know, like we were saying, like all the negativity and the dread of it will also support a bad period or bad PMS or whatever you want to call it. And to have a better, more positive mindset of my intuition is going to be heightened. You know, I can tune into myself and maybe figure out where I want to go in the future. And kind of thinking about it in that way has been really powerful for me. So I thank you so much for coming and sharing this message with all of us, because I think it's really going to have an impact on a lot of people. And I just wanted to ask, because we talk a lot about wellness on my podcast, and this is such an important piece of wellness for women. What are some other little things or big things that you do, other rituals that you do to support your wellness? If you'll give us some other insight into what you do.
Yeah, I mean, wellness is such a big part of my life. I've been walking a holistic path basically since I was like 18 or
Yeah.
19. It's really interwoven into everything that I do. And I really like to look at things through the lens of tending to the whole human self, which
Mhm.
includes the mental body, emotional body, spiritual body, physical body, and like the soul. And so for me, what I'm feeling to speak to right now is really tending to my soul in a way, because I found when I'm not doing things that feed and nourish my soul, I'm feeling less inspired. I'm feeling more depleted. I'm not wanting to show up for other people and do my work, which so much of my work is in the realm of service.
Mhm.
So for me, a big piece of that is spending time out in nature,
Mhm.
just like getting out of the city energy, being with the earth. I actually really love wild foraging. And so I love summertime and spring when all of the wild
Mm.
edibles start to come back in, because there's this really beautiful element of connecting to place, like literally being informed of the environment by ingesting the plants and materials that are growing in the land that I live on. And a big piece is also dance. I love dancing. I do ecstatic dance and West African dance. And
Oh,
like that
awesome.
is just like, especially the ecstatic dance is just like such this beautiful opportunity for me to just like express and move however I want to. And that really helps keep things moving through my body.
Mhm.
And then just all nourishment practices. I love eating healthy organic food. I've been shopping at the farmers market for over 10 years, and I love tasty drinks and just nourishment all around. Nourishment is really important to me.
I love that. Cree, thank you so much for being here with me today. If you guys enjoyed this podcast, please like it, review it, share it with someone you love. And I thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you. It's been so lovely.
Yeah.